You're in the 06010. Focus, fantasy focus.
Hello, welcome to Fantasy Focus Football, presented by Boost Mobile, alongside Mike Clay and Field Yates. My name is Daniel Dopp, back after a one-day hiatus. Honestly, Field, I mean, I know Mike wasn't here. I doubted he watched the show yesterday. But I do want to say this. After one day of Liz Loza hosting the show, I kind of felt like Mookie Betts watching my job get ripped out of my baseball glove away from me. I could not believe how good of a job Liz did. So, Liz, unbelievable job hosting this show. And honestly, that was also a segue into being able to talk about like that unbelievable baseball play. Like, what the heck happened with that?
Do you have any idea what we're talking about right now?
Nope, nothing. None of this. I don't know who any of these people are, what's happening. I know you were off yesterday.
You do know Liz Loza, right?
Mookie Betts is a really good bowler, right?
He is.
He actually is.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know him.
He literally,
PBA
yeah.
sometimes.
He's I think it was Wes Welker who famously, for his Twitter bio for a long time, was like professional tweeter who wastes his time playing football on occasion or something.
That's pretty good.
Mookie Betts, professional bowler who wastes his time being, one of the, 5 greatest baseball players on the planet
So
right
good.
now.
Yeah, he probably is a better bowler than baseball player, which is
Just
like,
saying something. Yeah, 'cause
unreal.
he might literally be, again, one of the 5 best. We don't need to go into the best baseball players on the planet right now, more than we already have. But yes, last night. Did you actually see what happened or no?
Yes, I did see what happened. I know Freddie Freeman, former Brave, home run in all 4 games so far. So I've seen the tidbits, the highlights.
Yeah, but did you see the play?
Yeah,
Mookie Betts
I did.
was
I
on?
did.
Okay,
As
yeah.
a
So
fan.
for those
That was
that maybe
me.
missed it,
That was
some
actually me
Yankees
trying to
fan
take the glove.
went full Jeffrey Mayer. I actually went to college with Jeffrey Mayer, believe it or not.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, I was a freshman when he was a senior at Wesleyan. He is at least was during his time, the all-time school hits leader. So it turns out he doesn't just take away potential catch and make them into home runs. He also hits lots of baseballs as well.
It's crazy. I could not believe when I was watching that play. At first, when I saw people tweeting about it, I was like, oh, I wonder what this was. And it was like, no, the fan got aggressive with his baseball mitt.
Like literally,
he was going in there.
he wanted to repurpose that thing and sell it on eBay for a lot of
That's
money.
exactly
But
what
he
it
had his
was.
phone in the other hand. He was already putting it on eBay.
So good. We got a huge show set up for today. Obviously, it is rankings day, as we do every single Wednesday. We're going to tell you where we have a bunch of these players ranked heading into Week 9. But we also got a bunch of news before we dive into all that news, because there was a lot of it, a barrage of news yesterday.
Busy Tuesday, huh?
It was crazy.
Yeah.
I want to say this. Tomorrow is going to be Halloween. We're going to dress up, do some fun stuff for Halloween.
Yeah.
Do you guys have like any Halloween traditions? Are there any like movies or TV shows that you or your family watches heading into it, or is it not that kind of a holiday for you guys?
We put up some decorations, carved some pumpkins. The girls, the last few days, the kitchen has just been a crime scene of painting. I've been scrubbing paint out of clothes, the carpet, the table, because they had a pumpkin contest at school, so they painted them and designed them, and they did a great job.
Did you have to scoop out the pumpkin guts, or did you
Not
leave
for that.
them?
When we carved, we did, but this was just a painting one.
Okay.
So we just the pretty standard stuff, and of course trick or treat tomorrow. But that's it.
Yeah.
So other than egging Mike's garage and toilet papering his front yard,
Yeah, I caught you on the camera. I already turned it over to the local authorities.
now, my kids are so young that we're still working on developing Halloween traditions. I am pumped though, because my soon-to-be 3-year-old does understand for the first time kind of what's taking place, which is cool. So she understands tomorrow she gets to wear her costume and we get to go walk around and say hello to the neighbors. And if she's good, she gets to eat some of the candy. I'm glad that we went to the dentist last week as opposed to next week. It could be a very different story, because my daughter is not exactly the queen of restraint when it comes to candy.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I don't think any of us at that age are. Once you get a taste for it, it's just you're in.
Problem.
You're in. Yeah. For what it's worth, I try, and I haven't been able to do this the last couple of years, but I try to watch all of the Harry Potters if I can help it. Just because there's such a thing. I love Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And I grew up a Harry Potter fan.
I think if you don't, it's a character flaw.
I agree with you, and especially, unfortunately, with the passing of Maggie Smith, who was just an icon. She might be my favorite actress of all time. It's between her and Kathy Bates.
Yeah.
Those are my 2 favorite actresses. And so Kathy Bates, obviously, in the movie Misery. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie, but it's another classic horror film.
I only watch Harry Potter and football films, so I don't know.
There you go. See, I knew I liked you.
I care about the
Field.
game too much. Yeah, I just watch Ben Johnson interviews on YouTube when I'm not watching either of those 2 things.
How do you feel about Margot Martindale? I feel like that's right in your wheelhouse there. No?
I do not.
Wow, oh my God.
I do not know.
Like a
Margot
NASCAR
Martin.
driver or what?
Yeah. No, she's I don't know. She's just an actress that's in everything and just right in that wheelhouse. I don't know. Just
Dang it.
random.
All right, well, now I got to go.
You said them
figure
2
out who
names and
Margot
she
Martindale is.
just popped into my head. Anyway.
Well, Speaking of names that popped in my head, I was just thinking about Anthony Richardson yesterday, and all of a sudden I got news that he's been benched for Joe Flacco. So obviously, there was, like I said, we got a bunch of news we're going to dive into, but from a fantasy perspective, we can talk about it. I just want to ask you guys, before we do that, from an NFL perspective, we've now watched Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson both get benched very early into their career. We've talked about the development of young quarterbacks in the NFL. Do you guys have any thoughts on how the NFL is approaching these young quarterbacks and the way that we either do or don't develop them?
You want to go first, Mike?
No, go ahead. I know you have some strong feelings.
Yeah, so I do. So I believe there are a lot of people that are today waking up and saying that the Colts are failing Anthony Richardson, a player who had just 13 career starts in college before he got drafted 4th overall. Is a very young prospect, right? This was a true junior coming out. I think he had just turned 21 when he got drafted, has all these physical skills, but needed to have them honed and refined. That is fair. I would say this. I believe the issue goes higher than coaches and GMs wanting to develop the players. I believe this is an ownership issue. And here's the reason why I say that. And I know that there are going to be Colts fans who are going to say, we've had the same GM for 8 years. If anything, Jim Irsay has been more patient with Chris Ballard than a lot of people believe he should have been. I believe it's an ownership issue, though. We have seen owners, because they are the ones who are making these calls ultimately, pull the plugs on coaches and GMs faster than ever. We are in an era where the minute something goes a little bit awry, next thing you know, you're talking about a coach being on the hot seat. I am not sitting here to tell you there are examples all over the board. I'm not trying to tell you here right now that Mike McCarthy is this unbelievable top 5 head coach. But for a guy who's won a ton of football games over the past few years in the regular season, he seems like a coach who could be no longer the Cowboys coach after the season. The expectations for coaches, I think, are higher than ever. The leash is shorter than ever in a lot of instances. I believe what is happening is that coaches and GMs realize we have to protect ourselves. Otherwise, it might be us who is on the way out. The people to blame for that are the owners, and the owners have rabbit ears. The owners watch TV. They watch our programming here on ESPN or any other network. And oftentimes, the first people that we blame on Monday morning when we do Monday morning quarterback is, let's blame the coach, right? That happens. It's just the way that it works. The buck often stops with the coach first, and sometimes only with the coach. So my personal opinion is this. Do I think that Anthony Richardson will only get better by playing? Yes. Do I also understand that Shane Steichen may be saying to himself, I got us to, 9 wins last year with Gardner Minshew for 13 games? Maybe we can make it to the playoffs and you just never know. And by the way, if Anthony Richardson doesn't develop at all throughout the rest of this season and remains the kind of player that he has been, maybe I'm the one that gets the blame. Maybe someone says, hey, the issue isn't the kid, it's the coach who couldn't get the most out of the kid, right? And next thing you know, he might be the one on the hot seat. So I'm not saying that the coach isn't responsible, the GM isn't responsible in some ways, the player isn't responsible in some ways. I do believe, though, the culture created by NFL owners right now of pulling the plug on coaches and GMs so fast is one of the roots, if not the most prominent root, behind why we are seeing these quarterbacks head to the bench so soon.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Something I will add, first of all, this isn't a shocker. We talked about this in the last 2 weeks, that if Richardson had a couple bad games, they were probably going to switch quarterback. So not shocked by that. The other part is they're not just developing one position here, okay? Anthony Richardson being a very poor passer so far this season has been problematic for Michael Pittman and Josh Downs, who's had, we'll talk about him in a little while, who's been great with Joe Flacco. They've invested a lot in that position. Alec Pierce and A.D. Mitchell were both day 2 picks, not to mention the running backs, the tight ends, the offensive line investments, putting the pressure on the defense because you're going 3 and out. You're developing a whole team, not one position, and if the quarterback can't get the ball to all the investment, like at wide receiver, for example, that's a big problem as well. And again, this is a contending team right now in the AFC, so they need to get better quarterback play. I wasn't surprised. I don't think this was a bad decision at all. I mean, he's just not getting the job done. And it's not like he's a rookie that's been around for a couple months, you know. He was here all last year, too. He's learned the playbook. He's had, 2 off seasons. So I get it. I get why they're making this change.
I will say it feels like, I don't want to say there's an overreaction, but to me, I think of like 3 of the best quarterbacks we've seen over the last 20 years in Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes. guys that didn't start right out of the gate and they had to sit. And I understand that Anthony Richardson technically sat, while he was injured last year to be able to learn. But like, I think we've gotten to the point where we've even said this before on the show. It feels like these rookie quarterbacks come in and they have these unrealistic expectations because we watch some young players, like C.J. Stroud, for example, just crush it. And now that becomes the expectation rather than the exception. And I feel like if you had the ability to say, okay, this is a long-term investment. We are not coming out here to be able to make sure that we try to capture lightning in a bottle in year one. I recognize that might put your franchise that first year behind the 8 ball a little bit. But there is something to be said for being able to learn behind a veteran presence, to be able to watch other people do it. And I don't think that that's necessarily an indictment of this kid is bad at football. But there is a way that I feel like it's okay for people to be able to learn from being able to sit on the bench and watch these other people in front of him, and like you almost get to see it develop in front of them rather than I'm going to put you into the fire and this is conflicting ideologies, but like it's sink or swim. You either do it or you don't. And I feel like there is a much better opportunity for some of these players, especially for a guy like Anthony Richardson, who did not play a ton of college football, who did have a lot of stuff he needed to work on coming into the NFL. It's like, I don't want to say they're set up for failure, but you're setting them up they need to crush it from day one. Otherwise, this is going to happen, and now you start talking about the confidence issue. Have we ruined this player's confidence because we put them out there and they couldn't do what we were hoping they were going to do? I'd rather have them sit for a while, learn and do that kind of thing. So, there's different ways to be able to approach it, but it's a tough one, man. It's a tough one all the way around.
Yeah, the last thing that I will say for right now, because I could do the entire show on this.
I'm sure
I feel
you
very
could.
passionately
I'm sure
about
you
this.
could.
Obviously, the player involved is one of the reasons, but I've gotten a lot of feedback yesterday to my stance that this is the correct call, talking about how, the numbers for Josh Allen through 10 starts, which I think is the same number that Anthony Richardson has, are so close that you have to at least give yourself a chance. Josh Allen in 2018, when he got drafted, played for a 6-10 Bills team, with the other quarterbacks on the roster being Derek Anderson, Nathan Peterman, and Matt Barkley. I'm not saying Joe Flacco is Patrick Mahomes, but as we know, Joe Flacco is pretty darn good right now. Yep. He has helped this team play meaningful offensive football for a team that is 4-4, 2 games out in the division, feels like it has a chance to make the playoffs.
He's led a team to a Super Bowl and won a Super Bowl as a quarterback. Is that not a guy that you could potentially take some interest from learning behind a guy like that?
And it's perfectly reasonable that he would be better than him right now. I mean, think about guys we've talked about recently, like Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold. They weren't this, it took them a while to break out. They weren't this good back then. I mean, there might have been some coaching issues there, players around them, but they weren't this good. So maybe Richardson just does need a couple of years to develop. And in the meantime, Flacco's the better quarterback. That's not an unreasonable thought. So I don't know. I get the move.
Just FYI, when Richardson is quarterback 1 in 2027, I am going to be the most arrogant, annoying analyst of all time.
I told you so.
I told you so. Journalism coming left and right. As far as the fantasy value is concerned, I think people kind of already know where we're headed with this one. But welcome back to Fantasy Relevance, Michael Pittman Jr., and especially Josh Downs. I mean, some numbers to put to these, but just here are the finishes for Michael Pittman Jr. in the games with Anthony Richardson this season. You ready for this? Wide receiver 58, 62, 54, 37, and 93. Put differently, unplayable. 0 touchdowns, 0 100-yard games. I have him as a borderline top 30 wide receiver this week, but maybe it's Josh Downs who becomes the biggest beneficiary because in games with Joe Flacco this year, he has 8, 9, and 7 catches, 82, 69, and 66 yards with 2 touchdowns. Hello.
Yeah, those 3 weeks he was Fantasy's number 5 scoring receiver. So, Downs crushed it. Pittman was 19th, by the way, during the 3 games, and he was actually under 40 yards in 2 of those games, so it scored touchdowns. So both of them highly productive with Joe Flacco under center.
Flacco.
And you just said it too, so I don't want to hear it. Colts receivers, by the way, have had the second hardest schedule so far this season, mid-pack the rest of the way. So that should lighten up a little bit. And that includes this week, the Vikings. Most fantasy points to receivers. A lot of that is just heavy volume because they've been ahead so much. Second most targets, catches, yards, and touchdowns allowed so far this season. They've allowed 17-plus points 8 times. And they've allowed 11-plus points 15 times already, about 2 per game. And, of course, if 2 receivers are going to get to double-digit fantasy points, it's most likely Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, and maybe Alec Pierce if he catches a long ball. But you never know what that
YOLO ball coming.
I wonder, I just want to close the book on Anthony Richardson. If I do have him on my fantasy roster, is he one of those quarterbacks that you feel like you need to keep on the end of your bench?
You drop him.
I cut him already. I cut him in our FF Now league. I had him in 2. And I
Keeper and dynasty leagues are different, obviously.
You know what? Now I'm regretting the offseason where I was like, you guys are taking him too early, and then his ADP came down, and then I started taking him in a couple leagues, and now I have regrets. So I'm leaning on Kirk Cousins in one. I think I have Bo Nix in the other. Who's he's been awesome. We'll talk about him this week.
Yeah, and obviously Joe Flacco is not really someone that we're looking at from a fantasy perspective. He just elevates all of those players around him.
Does,
like
yeah. Just
about.
as a quarterback, although he scores he throws 2 touchdowns every game. So in terms of like a QB2, you could do worse than Superflex.
Sure could.
Certainly could. All right, let's talk about another thing that happened yesterday while I was out getting lunch with my family. Diontae Johnson got traded, guys. We have been clamoring
I hate this one.
for a Diontae Johnson trade, and then I saw, just like Mike, you just alluded to it, it was to the Baltimore Ravens.
I know that hurt. When
And
I saw the
like,
Ravens, I was like, oh.
Come on, guys. This is not what I wanted. So I'm feeling like I'm aligned with Mike. We did not talk about this before the show. Field, do you have the same sentiment that you were pumped to see Diontae Johnson out of Carolina, but a little bummed with where his landing spot was?
Yes. So let me start by saying this. If he had gone to the Chargers, for example, would have liked that a whole lot more. If he had gone to even Kansas City, I would have liked that more than Baltimore. So on the spectrum of like landing spots that I thought were realistic, not the top.
Yeah.
Houston would have been another potentially good one, although Nico Collins is back as soon as next week. He might be wide receiver 3 there, right? As we have seen, it's going to be hard for that offense to sustain 3 fantasy-relevant wide receivers. So it could have been better for sure in landing spots. Let me say this. I am evaluating this more through the lens of Carolina versus Baltimore.
Okay.
And so I'm establishing this as far as the value of Diontae Johnson for the rest of the season. I think this decreases his maximum value, and I think it increases the floor.
Yeah.
And possibly by quite a bit. Let me tell you why. I think worst case scenario for Diontae Johnson had 2 factors in play in Carolina. One, Bryce Young takes over as a starter once again, which I don't know that to be a fact of happening one day, but I think it is possible. Andy Dalton, as we know, we'll find out for sure at practice time, but has been dealing with a thumb injury on his throwing hand, right? As Diontae Johnson with Bryce Young as his starting quarterback the first 2 weeks of the season was completely unplayable. The second factor here, I don't know this for a fact, but I think I've been around this long enough to have a sense of where things were at. I think Diontae Johnson could have played this past Sunday. Injury that they held him out because of a potential for a trade.
Devontae Adams type injury.
Wouldn't be surprised if late in the season, hamstring's a little bit sore, more work for Jalen Colker. So what I am saying is I think there's a real chance that the pit for Diontae Johnson in Carolina was pretty deep, that it was like unplayable with Bryce Young or missing, 2 of the last 5 games of the season because of quasi-injuries for a player going into a contract year. He looked miserable there.
Yeah. Remember, he was traded there. He didn't sign there. He was traded there, so he didn't have to necessarily be happy, and I'm sure a lot of people weren't happy playing for that team.
By the way, take this a step further. You're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, all right, Diontae Johnson, after DeAndre Hopkins, who I think is an inferior talent to Diontae Johnson right now, goes for a 5th that can become a 4th, right? I mean, look at some of the wide receiver trades that we have seen recently. The Panthers got a flip of a 5 and a 6 for Diontae, basically giving it away, right?
Yep.
I think that speaks to where things were at between the player and the team. So I'm using all those to establish that I believe the floor for Diontae is higher now in Baltimore.
Maybe, but if that floor is like flex, it's just like if you're going to get that without much ceiling, I don't know. I think like a week-to-week ranking for him is just going to be like, man, all right, I'll throw him in my flex, fine, but there's just not much here.
Let me ask you this.
And I'll go ahead.
Tomorrow, if Diontae Johnson was playing a game, even having not seen him yet, Diontae Johnson in this Ravens offense or Diontae Johnson with Bryce Young at quarterback?
With Bryce, I think it'd be close because he's going to get a big target share. He just had a good game last week. No, I guess he didn't play. He didn't play with.
He didn't. With 2 games with Bryce Young, he's been
it was
completely
just
unplayable.
Beginning of the season, and he was boom bust regardless, even with Andy Dalton in there. So
75, 67, and 82. Those were 3 of his 7 finishes this season.
It's just tricky because it's like the efficiency worse, but the volume much higher in Carolina. And I think it kind of offsets. Also, Baltimore has a brutal schedule for wide receivers going forward, 5th, 4th hardest the rest of the season, which concerns me a little bit. But I think the main issue here is this is such a low volume pass offense that has never changed during the Lamar Jackson era. Since he took over as the full-time starter, they are dead last in wide receiver targets. They are dead last in wide receiver fantasy points. And this might be their deepest wide receiver room or one of the deepest receiver rooms, but I'm just not sure it's going to matter. He's still going to run a lot. He's going to scramble a lot. They're going to give it to Derrick Henry a ton, who has a touchdown in every game this season. Zay Flowers, I'm sorry. His target share will go down. He's not going anywhere. He's going to be a key component to this offense. What do you say? You have 4 games with double-digit targets this season. Mark Andrews is trending up a little bit. I think Isaiah likely gets hurt a little more than Andrews here. Rashad Bateman obviously gets hurt. I just don't think there's enough volume in this offense to keep these guys consistent in fantasy.
I'll say this. I was looking at the raw numbers yesterday because I was trying to find some silver linings, right? Ravens are third in passing yards so far in the NFL, and they are third in passing touchdowns with 15 on the season. However, they're 17th in passing yards to wide receivers and 23rd in passing touchdowns to wide receivers. I think, like you were describing, it feels like Mark Andrews is starting to come along a little bit. Mike, I know that was a tough thing for you to say, and I just want to say I'm proud of you to give Mark Andrews a little bit of love on
his snaps were up this week. I don't know what. Yeah, we'll see if it continues.
Does it feel like
now there's cautious optimism, but
does it feel like with another trusted option in the passing game that Justice Hill is going to be one of those guys that's more impacted than Zay Flowers or potentially?
Not really. I mean, he was already trending down a little bit anyway. They just haven't thrown to the running backs that much, other than like a couple spike games for Hill. So I don't know. I mean, he's not going to have them spike games necessarily.
Sure.
Unless game script is very much in his favor, but I don't know if the running back positional target share for them is going to change a lot, maybe a little bit.
Do wonder, I am trying to find the positives here because, when you say these things about like how little they throw to the wide receivers and how they've already been there's actually a lot of positives with this Ravens offense already. Do they need to trade for Diontae Johnson? I think a lot of people would say, unless he can play cornerback, probably not, but they did trade for him. Right?
Yeah.
They did make the trade, and part of me wonders, and again, I am not, like I said, I think the ceiling has gone down. I'm 100% of the belief that like Diontae Johnson is going to have a hard time cracking my top 10 rankings for wide receiver. And he had like a month stretch where he was like between wide receiver 8 and wide receiver 12 in my rankings. I don't believe that's on the horizon here in Baltimore.
Nope.
But I am hoping that they make this trade and they're saying to themselves, we need to add a playmaker like this. Big play propensity is way up here in Baltimore, right? The Panthers right now, second to last in terms of yards per attempt this season in the passing game.
Yikes.
Baltimore Ravens, tied with the Lions for the best in the NFL. Like, the dimensions of the field are going to look a whole lot different for Diontae Johnson. I don't think the volume is going to be as high. The end zone targets are going to be hard to keep up because he is probably still first in that category, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, if not first, he's on the podium, one of the 3 highest. Yeah. Those aren't going to be as consistent. But maybe, just maybe, he turns in a couple more, like maybe he has 1 or 2 games this season, 5 catches for 102 yards and a touchdown. Yeah. Whereas in Carolina, he maybe needed 9 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown.
So answer these questions and then we can move on. Zay Flowers maybe falls a couple of spots, but about neutral with where he's at.
He's down a little bit. Let me just add this on, though, before we move on. Like, we've talked about this before with this offense. Like a 22 to 25% target share in some offense is pretty good. In Baltimore, it just hasn't been that good. Hollywood Brown had such a hard time as a cleared feature target, much like Zay Flowers now, being a top. He was never a top fantasy option. He was solid. And now you have Flowers and Johnson, and Bateman's going to get some run, and the 2 tight ends, and Justice Hill, not to mention running it through. Like, that's my problem. I just don't know how it calculates into consistent fantasy production. I think it takes a hit overall. You're right. There are some positives to being in a good offense. And by the way, to answer this question too, the reason that you trade for him, I think, is because they're like, all right, we got to get the ring now. Like, it's a luxury. We basically give him nothing to get a really good receiver and upgrade a Nelson Aguilar essentially when they're throwing the football. Like, I think that's why you do it. It's just like, we're a Super Bowl contender. Let's just add to our arsenal offensively. I think that makes sense, but I don't think it's so great for Baltimore, but bad for fantasy.
I would say like Diontae Johnson with Andy Dalton, highest level.
Yes.
Diontae Johnson with Bryce Young, lowest level. Because of the possibility of also, like, ticky-tack injuries costing in games.
Fair, yeah.
Diontae Johnson with the Ravens in the middle. I just want to summarize where I'm at.
That's totally fair.
Value goes down, but floor, I think, creeps a little bit higher.
We're just frustrated because we wanted him on a different team.
Exactly.
I
was going to trade. I saw the beginning of the tweet,
right,
and I was like, "Here we go!" And then I saw
Diontae
Baltimore
Johnson to the
Ravens.
If it was Chargers, I'd be like, "Holy crap!" Like, we might have a top 15 wide
Although
receiver.
Lad McConkey, man, he's crushing it.
He's good.
Crushing it.
So if you've got, Zay Flowers is going to continue to be a top 20, 25 wide receiver. You think
25.
Diontae Johnson will be like a low-end flex play given the matchup? This week, I think it's going to be tough because they take on the Denver Broncos.
Yeah,
and also, right out of the gate, just how much is he going to play? We've seen this over the past 2 weeks
Yep.
with both DeAndre Hopkins and also Amari Cooper. Is he a 50% of the playtime player? Is he a 33? Is he a 75? We'll see. But I think, by this is week 9, right?
Week 9.
By week 10, we should see him as basically a full-time player.
Yeah, I could see like Flowers 27, Johnson 32 or something in the rankings consistently somewhere in that range.
That's kind of what I was
Once they
thinking.
get baked
But,
into the offense, and they're good to go.
But just keep in mind, again, 4th hardest schedule for receivers going forward for Baltimore, so it's going to be tough. You know, those are things shift around. Maybe it's going to be end up the 10th hardest something, but it's probably not going to be easy. It's a tough slate.
Really quickly, on the other side of this, Xavier Legette feels like the obvious guy that would get a bump, assuming Andy Dalton is under center. If there is no Andy Dalton under center, you're not starting any of these Carolina Panthers.
Just gonna whisper this into the microphone right now. Whisper it really quietly. Jalen Coker, you have my attention.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
he's doing some stuff. We'll see.
All right.
Shh. Sleep.
I don't know if
Don't
he's
sleep
been,
on Jalen Coker.
he's been playing inside, right, where Adam Thielen plays, so I'm wondering how they're going to maneuver guys around.
Don't sleep on Jalen Coker. Probably
Who's going to play outside then?
deeper league.
Coker
ad,
going to
but
the
still.
bench. Deep Dynasty League, fine.
Yeah.
Deeper leagues, but still, I just want it on the record that I'm a Jalen Coker believer. Not limited to the fact that he went to a school, Holy Cross, that I follow very closely for football purposes. Shout out to the Crusaders.
Biases.
Yeah, a little bit.
This is a Jake Bobo bias.
No. This is not the Jake Bobo. I just mark my words. He's going to play a ton.
Look, when an undrafted guy like that is suddenly works his way up to an every down role,
Playing
and he blows past Jonathan Mingo and stuff. And again, it could be I would keep an eye on where they line up on the field. With Thielen back, that could affect him. But anyway, it's impressive. But yeah, Legette is a fine bench hold. He scored a touchdown every other game going back to week 4. But a lot of under 13.5 fantasy points in all but one game. So it hasn't happened yet, but no Diontae Johnson now.
Yep.
And we'll see if Thielen plays this week. If Thielen doesn't return this week, Legette is on the flex radar.
All of this is with the assumption that Andy Dalton is the starting quarterback. If it's Bryce Young, you're not starting any of these guys in your fantasy league unless you are in the deepest of leagues and you need to throw a dart at somebody. All right, let's talk about one more piece of news before we talk about some
We have
rankings.
some rankings after that, yeah.
Stefon Diggs, unfortunately, we found out is going to be done for the season. Fields, you had already led into it. Unfortunately, I mean, at this point in redraft leagues, you can drop Stefon Diggs.
He is
Period. End
droppable.
of
That
story.
part sucks.
Nico
And for-
Collins can return after this week, too.
Yes, we got a one-game view of this, and then we have the rest of the season.
Right.
So for one game, and by the way, that game is tomorrow night. And by the way, that game is against the New York Jets.
We're
You have-
favored.
yeah,
Jets are favored at home in this
stunned
one.
by that.
2-6 favored.
I know.
I don't like that.
The Jets haven't been obviously nearly as I would say they have not been as dominant defensively this year. So the matchup is a little bit less daunting compared to where it was last year, but it's still not great.
Still great against receivers. Yeah.
Yeah, do you really feel great? And we'll talk about this more in depth tomorrow. But I think that I pointed this yesterday before we had the official news on Stefon Diggs. John Mechie had 9 routes last week and had targets on 3 of them. I think there's a chance he steps into a more prominent role, but this might be wide receiver by committee because they got a lot of them. It's going to be for this week: Tank Dell, Xavier Hutchinson, Robert Woods, John Mechie, all of them playing. But once Nico's back, I think it's the 2 wide receivers that matter.
Yeah, if you have
Nico
Nico,
Collins
yeah, you're feeling good about Nico. Your Nico stock for sure. That guy's going to be featured absolutely. And Tank Dell, he'll be fine. I know he's kind of underwhelmed the last couple of weeks. Hasn't really, he had the good big first game. Has been quiet. I think he's going to be okay. He's just
Found the
gonna
end
have-
zone
he's
last
gonna be
week.
on the
That was good.
field. We know C.J. Stroud's good. You lose Stefon Diggs in about a quarter of the targets there. I think you feel good about him too. Going
Brutal for Diggs. I mean, tearing your ACL,
Yeah,
32 years old, going into the final year, but he's going to be a free agent in March. How do you evaluate that one right there? It's a tough one.
That's very tough, very difficult. Unfortunately, I feel like I've got to call it in the board bet that you guys had on Nico Collins and Stefon Diggs. I think there is no winner here whatsoever because with Nico missing 4 weeks, being on IR.
We put a minimum games played
Agreed,
threshold in
yeah.
there anyways. I'll be honest with you. Like, I would prefer Nico Collins
Yeah, no doubt.
to Stefon Diggs. Don't no doubt me.
I was just going to say.
There's no stake. Look. No. Like there's no stakes. It's not like you're paying me $100 on this one. But I think it became very clear that Nico was the dude's a superstar. He was dominating in yardage. So
He is.
I don't need the win. I don't care about that. I think just the analysis is going forward.
Oh, well, if you don't need the win, let's just blow right past this board bet segment, Mike. and
Field
we'll
could have
go
the
on
win. He needs the win. You take the win. It's your
Really quickly, let's do a couple of board bets from last week because Mike always talks about how we never.
Yeah,
talk
see,
about
that's
board
why I
bets
don't need
when
him
he's on
because
here.
I'll.
Last week, we had a board bet on Caleb Williams. Was he going to be quarterback 15 or better? Mike said he would not be. Field said he would be. He was quarterback 28. So, Mike, you win that board bet.
That was rough. That was a rough showing. And
He
what
was
happened there? Well,
very
what's
good in
your-
the second half.
What are your thoughts on? Yeah, he did step it.
I thought
he
he
did take a
just-
step forward. You're right. But man,
I'm all in on Caleb Williams still.
Still bullish.
all right. No,
I mean, as
no
the real
concerns
life
after
player.
that. After
Real
that
life
first
player
session?
for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought he was really good in the second half. I thought that I thought that was a highly competitive football game on both sides.
Well,
Does not change my bottom line feeling on Caleb. I mean, obviously for fantasy purposes, like that's a different conversation week in and week out. He's more matchup dependent than other quarterbacks. But I thought coming out of the bye, he had a good 4-week slate. So there's still some hope here over the next 3 games.
I'm with you on that. I've got some positive feelings about him in my ranking.
Yeah, Washington defense, by the way, I had mentioned this last week, but they're trending up.
They're trending up.
Getting them going. They're
The
improving.
Giants this week.
We had one more board bet. It was whether or not Jared Goff was going to be a top 17
This one's
quarterback.
hilarious.
Mike said no. I said yes. He was quarterback 18 in a week in which the Lions scored 52 points. Mike, you barely got by with this one.
He had,
And
like,
David Montgomery threw a
15
passing
passing attempts.
touchdown.
Yeah, he had like 60 passing yards and had 3 touchdowns. That Lions offense just continues to defy logic. I mean, I can't project that. Like, I don't know how to. They're breaking
awesome.
everything. I can't rank them high enough. They're not like barely using Sam Laporta. It's unreal. That offense is
Sam, 6 catches last week for Sam.
I was
Maybe
pumped for
6-pack. Yeah.
I was pumped to see that. So, yeah,
Anyway, I'll take
unfortunately,
those Ws.
fortunately
Thank
for Field and I, Mike, you got 2 board bet wins, and we finally paid it off, so you can stop coming at both of us for saying we never have time on the show to talk about one.
Unblock me on
It's
Twitter
about
now.
time. It's about time we do it. Okay.
All right,
You want to unblock me on Twitter now?
No, I'm not doing that.
let's dive
I'm
into
just
our
going to
week
continue
9
to troll you
rankings.
from my burners. That's it.
At Mike Play Cornhole is my favorite thing, for what it's worth.
Can you believe how long it took him to fix the Chargers defense? I mean, how many?
Oh, yeah,
burner
we should
accounts?
say that. Chargers
many burner
defense did get an
accounts?
adjustment that may have affected your fantasy outcome this week. What was the outcome?
The fans were upset because the Chargers on Sunday, they obviously beat the Saints. It was 26-8, but the Saints scored 2 of their 8 points via a safety when the Chargers had a bad snap on a punt. The Chargers defense has now been charged with just 6 rather than the 8, as the safety was taken by the punt team. It's not considered points allowed in our game. The box score in your fantasy matchup is adjusted accordingly. Obviously, every league has different rules for how defenses are scored, but in most leagues, it resulted in a 1-point boost because oftentimes the threshold for, let's say your team starts with 10 defensive points, 5 of those come with a shutout. It goes down to 4 once you have allowed 8 or more points. And then it goes down to 3 when you've allowed 15 or more points. And then 2 when you're allowed maybe 24 points or more. Anyways, a lot of people very passionate about that, and I respect it. It has been adjusted accordingly, and we sometimes these things take a little bit of time. So we apologize for the 18-hour delay. But
By the way, not
it's been
something that we
fixed.
control for what it's worth.
Yeah, but we're doing our best to try to, through
Make sure
back
the masses
channels,
know.
alert
Yep.
people that
but what-
can control it.
And those scoring corrections every single week go and play Wednesday.
Well, you
So
see, there's
not
already
us,
been
right?
one involved. We'll talk about it later, but there's already one involving a certain Falcons player.
Yes.
There is.
We'll talk. If time permits, we'll discuss that in a bit.
All right, top rankings. We're going to start at the wide receiver spot. Wide receivers 1 through 10 this week. We got CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, and Amon-Ra at the top 5. 6 through 10 is A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Drake London, Puka Nacua, and Cooper
Let's
Kupp.
go. We're back. 2 top 10s.
Nice. Wow. Mike, I want to ask you, why do you have both Rams wide receivers ranked as top, or projected, as top 10?
How can you not? I mean, based on what we've seen from them since last season when they played together, and Cooper Kupp was not a full go for most of last season, so he was a little behind Nacua, but Nacua just, whether Kupp's out there or not, just continues to crush. Last week returns just, limited. He played, 53% of the snaps, 9 targets, and 2 carries, and 9 touches for 111 yards. He had 5 touches on 24 snaps in week 1. It was very apparent. I mean, I drafted Nacua a lot this year. Have him in Dynasty, drafted him a ton. Just seeing him come out of the gate them first couple drives in week 1, it's like, this is going to pay off big time. This guy is legit. He's going to be a featured player. And then we saw it again, even though he was limited this past week. Matthew Stafford loves him. So he's, we're set on him going forward. And then Cooper Kupp, we had the huge week 1 with the 21 targets, comes back last week. And he played 56% of the snaps, 8 targets, 5 catches, 51 yards, and a touchdown. That offense runs through those 2 guys. It sounds like Cooper Kupp is off the trade market, so they're going to feature those guys going forward, and they'll probably push past 50% of the targets most weeks with one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. So I'm pumped for both of them moving forward.
You know why he's totally off the trade market? Because they're a half game out of first place now in that
doubt.
division. Just one more nugget on Cooper Kupp. This is insane. He has a target. He has a target share per route run of 36.1%. Which means that of every route that he runs, he's seeing a target on 36.1. That's second in the NFL. Like, he's on the field, he's getting the football. I have both of these players inside my top 11 for this week.
Who's first there, Neighbors?
I believe it's Neighbors, yes.
Yeah.
So I'm a slightly more pessimistic on these 2.
Oh.
I've obviously got Puka up there a little bit higher, but I want to ask, how many times have we actually had Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, when they play on the field at the same time, both be top 10 wide receivers?
I'm sure that's rare, but I mean, they're gonna yin-yang a little bit.
Yeah. Never. They've never both been top 10.
Okay.
They've only been top
okay.
20 3 times.
How many times have Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown done that, or Godwin and Evans? You know what I mean? I'm sure it's pretty rare.
It is pretty rare.
It's hard for both guys to be at that level. And
So then if I board bet you saying, like, we will only have one of these wide receivers inside the top 15, would you say, well, no, that makes sense. I could see one of them.
this week?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I wouldn't board bet that. That's
Okay.
just not how, I mean,
Even
it's
though we have them both
probabilities.
ranked as top 10.
Yeah, but that's how probabilities work, right? You know, you're ranking guys in the top 10 knowing that they're not going to finish top 10 this week. They're just the most likely to finish in the
It's like a
top 10 among
confidence
everyone
index,
else.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
All right. I've got Cooper Kupp at wide receiver 14. I thought about putting him at 15, but I got him a little bit lower than you guys just because I totally get everything you're saying. I just don't know. Like, Puka seems like the guy. Clear number one in that offense is Puka Nacua.
I don't know. I think it'll just depend on the matchup. I think that, again, I think it's going to zigzag. I think Stafford and Kupp have great chemistry, and he's just looking for whoever's open out there. I mean, they're both going to be featured players. I just feel it's like sometimes you're just ranking these guys like you adjust for the matchup week to week, but it's like moving forward, good chance both finish top 10. They could be 8 and 10 the rest of the season. No doubt about it.
DeMarcus Robinson, 2 more touchdowns incoming.
No, I don't want to
That's
hear
it.
that.
That's exactly what's going to happen.
Jordan Whittington, when he gets healthy, who knows? I mean,
All right, let's talk about wide receivers 11 through 20 here so far in week 9, where we have them placed. Guys, at wide receiver 11, T. Higgins, then Terry McLaurin, Chris Olave, DK Metcalf, and Garrett Wilson round out the top 15. 16 through 20 is Darnell Mooney, Devontae Smith, DJ Moore, Jaden Reed, and Devontae Adams. Guys, Darnell Mooney,
If you look at the first 10 wide receivers, like one of my big takeaways was 0 surprising names on that list.
Yeah.
Like Malik Neighbors, a surprise that he's that high, but in terms of like pedigree, this guy was the 6th overall pick in the draft, like mega talent. When you get to 11 through 20, there's kind of one name that I would say you're like, oh, I did not expect to have maybe 2 with Jaden Reed, but he was great to finish last year. Darnell Mooney is like the one thing, not like the other things, but he's top 20 in target share right now. That's a good number, and I'm sure you have the numbers for the matchup because, man, is this a juicy one.
I mean, yeah, they're playing Dallas. Dallas was really poor early in the season. They've actually cracked down pretty well the last couple of weeks. So I don't know if it's a super great matchup. Trevon Diggs has shadowed a couple times. So if he did it, he would be on Drake London anyway. So I'm not worried about that. I think the matchup is neutral, maybe slightly good, but the key is just Mooney is, to your point, he's 2nd in snaps, 6th in routes, 10th in targets, has 4 touchdowns. The only slight concern here is the same that applies to Kirk Cousins, which is most of what he's done have been in 2 games. Mooney's 2 big games were against Tampa Bay. Otherwise, he has a couple like okay games and then a couple duds mixed in there. So the question is, can Atlanta crush other teams in terms of fantasy points other than Tampa Bay? And maybe we'll find out here against Dallas.
My question was specific to Trevon Diggs. Do you have a metric that shows how many points per game cornerbacks allow a week after dropping a D's nuts jokes?
I don't have that analytic yet. It's still in development.
Did you guys see that?
I did see it.
I missed this.
He
was
dropped a
unhappy
D's nuts
with-
joke on
with
a reporter.
Oh, no way. I totally missed it.
A reporter tweeted
Not even a
out-
joke. He
tweeted a video and said, "What is Trevon Diggs doing here?" It looked like he was kind of jogging towards. I forget who the player he was.
It was like a
chasing down.
play where he could have probably put a bit more effort into making the tackle as the support player.
Yeah, and so like he got very frustrated with the reporter. Came out, sought him out in the locker room afterwards. Went over to the reporter to like have words with him, and then dropped a joke on him. So it was
Anyways,
one of those things where
Mike will work on that metric. We'll have a full leaderboard built out on ESPN.com next week.
One player on the list. What is with the cornerbacks, by the way, getting like crushed for effort? Deontay Banks too. That's a bizarre one too.
But that's been all season for him.
Yeah, well, yeah, but then when he actually got benched, it was like I don't know what he did wrong exactly. It was the play where he got leaped over by Henry, but then it was the play where he pushed Pickens out of bounds and saved that touchdown. So I don't know. And then he got benched. That's a fascinating one in New York.
Well,
We benched
Stevenson
Daniel
did not
yesterday
help,
for a show. Everybody
oh,
was
yeah,
like, what the heck?
Yeah,
Week
he
9.
deserved that though. We know that.
That was a tough one, unfortunately, watching Liz do so well. I felt like my job was actually, like I'm on the hot seat is where it worked out. Speaking of cornerbacks, though, like that Tyreek Stevenson play, like when you want to talk about all cornerbacks not putting in the effort that you need to put in. Like,
That's probably like a 1-quarter benching this weekend, right? Probably for him. Like
yeah.
I would be not surprised if he's on the bench to begin the game. Who knows?
That's crazy.
All right.
All right, let's look at wide receivers 21 through 30 when we look at everyone here.
This is actually a good
Honors.
speaking of transition, Dan.
That's right. Portland Sutton, wide receiver 21, Marvin Harrison Jr., Tank Dell, Jalen Waddle, and Ladd McConkey round out the top 25. Zay Flowers, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Josh Downs, Xavier Worthy, and then Diontae Johnson 26 through 30. I mean, when I look at this, there's a couple guys actually that stand out here because this is where you start having some conversations about where you feel like people are going to fall based on matchups. A lot of times I feel like 21 through 30 is a lot of times you're looking at matchups, right? Marvin Harrison Jr. was wide receiver 4 last week.
Yeah, he was great.
We haven't really seen the consistency from Marvin Harrison Jr., which is not necessarily always his fault, although sometimes it can be. Sometimes it feels like he just sort of disappears from that offense. But he's taken on the Chicago Bears, and that's the part that has me outside the top 20 based on what he did last week. Mike, do you have anything that you want to add as far as like where you're at on Marvin Harrison Jr.'s projection against this really good Bears second?
Yeah, tough matchup. 4 receivers have had 13 fantasy points against Chicago so far this season. You're right, Harrison coming off a good game, but he's been all over the map this season. Let's just forget about the concussion game where he left after a few snaps. 15-plus fantasy points in 4 of 7 games, under 6 in the other 3. He's been very touchdown dependent. He's 42nd in receptions among receivers this season, but has 5 touchdowns and 7 end zone targets. So that's good. At least that'll help us. But he is a little lucky. You know, he's at like, I believe, 3.5 in terms of expected touchdowns. So if he's a little unlucky in touchdowns instead of a little lucky, we might be having a different conversation here. So that makes me nervous. They have to find a way to get him the ball more consistently, and they should be. I mean, look at Malik Neighbors. Like, follow that script and get the guy the ball.
5 straight games with 7 or fewer targets for Marvin Harrison.
That's unacceptable.
He is a
You don't invest
supernova
that
talent. Yes, I have been very, very much on that train in recent weeks that, like, you don't bypass opportunities to trade down from pick number 4 because the guy's so good that you utilize him as like a solid number 2 wide receiver, not a solid number 1 wide receiver.
Yeah, and it's easy. You know, we just talked about this with quarterbacks earlier, and it could take guys some development, and that's fine. But, like, by all accounts, he looks the part. He looks NFL ready. I mean, when they throw it to him, it looks good. I don't get it. I don't understand it.
I think that I'm not benching him, obviously. None of us are saying that you're benching him this week after what he was able to do, but you're just lowering expectations. I do want to say on this list, I think that Diontae Johnson, wide receiver 30, we haven't had all of our rankers technically update their rankings, I don't think, since the trade. So I would be surprised if he was actually
I'm closer
high
to 40.
come game time.
Yep.
So just something
Lad
for the people at home.
McConkey, my draft crush, just moving on up in the world.
Man, he's so good, right? I'm pumped to be able to see him
Yeah,
continue.
he's like, they had their bye, and he's still, what is he, 22nd in fantasy points a receiver after the bye?
Big game.
Yeah, he's killing it.
Yep.
All right, let's look at some running backs here in Week 9. Running backs 1 through 10. Seems like there's a very obvious RB1. Alvin Kamara, Kyron Williams, Saquon Barkley, Bijan, and then Devon Achane. 6 through 10 is Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Kenneth Walker III, Aaron Jones, and DeAndre Swift. Guys, Alvin Kamara.
I think people might be surprised by this.
No, well, there's only a handful of absolutes in life, right?
Yeah.
But one of the absolutes is you start your running backs against the Carolina Panthers. That's just going to be the rest of the season how we approach it.
All 3 of us have Kamara as our RB1 this week.
How can you not against this defense?
Well, it's not just that. Derek Carr's back, too, and that's huge. You look at Kamara through Week 5 when Derek Carr was active for this team. RB1 in fantasy points, 100-plus yards in 4 of those games. They played Carolina actually in Week 1, 20 touches, 110 yards, and a touchdown. And you mentioned the Panthers, just to put a couple numbers on it, 15 touchdowns. It's the most allowed to running backs, the most fantasy points, at least 1 running back touchdown in every single game this season, already 7 17-plus fantasy point games. So, yeah, Kamara, I mean, before Carr got hurt, Kamara was the number 1 scorer. He was beating Derrick Henry by 9 points at that point. So he certainly with this matchup belongs at the top. And I mean, it's the top. The reason why, like, you might be like a little surprised is because running back's kind of strong. You look at this list. There's some notable names not on this list, which we'll get to in the second panel. Top of the position's pretty good right now.
Yeah. By the way, the Panthers have allowed 25 more fantasy points than any other team in the NFL right now. The gap between the Panthers and the Bills, who are surprisingly perhaps 31st in the NFL, is the same as the gap between the Bills and the Raiders, who are up at 24th. So it's just a massive, massive gap between Carolina and the rest of the league.
All that passing game work that he gets. And, Mike, you mentioned it. I had the similar stat where it's knowing that a running back has scored in every single game against the Panthers. I swear if Kendre Miller is the one that scores a touchdown,
Oh, my God.
I'm going to be so mad.
Yeah,
I'm going to be so mad.
In his debut, he played quite a bit. He already passed Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller, and I wonder if they're going to scale back Kamara's rushing a little bit. He's still featured in the passing game. That won't affect much. I mean, Kamara, worst case, should be a mid-range RB1 going forward, and if this offense gets going with Carr there, it could be even better. But who did the Saints play Week 2? Was it Jacksonville?
I thought it was Dallas, right?
Was it
They had
Dallas?
44 points?
Yeah, that's it. So they played Carolina and Dallas, and in hindsight, like, those 2 defenses, especially at that point, were brutal. I mean, obviously the Panthers are still terrible. Dallas has been getting better, But we were like, man, they include Kubiak and this offense and everything. And we're like, well, or should we buy into this? Obviously, the answer was no, because they immediately came back to earth, even with Carr. Still could be better, but I'm just saying it shows you small samples. We talk about that. Sometimes you got to look at the opponent and the sample, and that's what happened there with the Saints.
One last thing I'm just going to say. I'm pumped for DeAndre Swift being inside the top 10, man.
He's crushing it.
He's looked so good. Each of the last 4 games, he has been unbelievable. I think it's over 18.5 fantasy points in each of his last 4 games. 3 of those, he had over 20 fantasy points. He's just crushing.
By the way, the running back right now, I believe this is correct, who is number 1 in fantasy points per game is on that panel. Probably would surprise almost everyone.
Joe Mixon?
No. No, I don't think it's Mixon. If I'm wrong, it's very close.
Ken Walker the third.
Ken Walker, yeah. I'm pretty sure it's Ken Walker.
Wow, how about that? Yeah. All that passing game work he's dump off city. His passing game this year, his passing game utilization this year is Rashad White's from last year, just being a good runner as well.
Yeah, he is electric.
It's just been dump off city. Yeah. It's not like they're designing a bunch of plays. It's just, hey, oh wow, pressured again, throw it away.
Yeah.
And Walker's there.
They invested in Zach Charbonnet last year, and he was fine when Walker was out, but there's a difference there. They just have a home run.
He's been fine again this year when Walker was out. Remember Walker?
Yeah, he was fine. He was fine, but when Walker, my point is when Walker comes back, he's the guy. Yeah.
Yep, I'm with you on that. All right, let's look at running backs 11 through 20. Here in week 9, running back 11, Jonathan Taylor, then Jahmyr Gibbs, Kareem Hunt, Breece Hall, and
That's what I'm saying.
Cook.
Look at that top 15.
Darn good right there.
16 through 20. You got James Conner, Brian Robinson Jr., Tony Pollard, J.K. Dobbins, and Josh Jacobs. Yeah, the first half of that panel is a little bit different than the second half of that.
Yeah, you see that, you're like, do you mean 1 through 5? That's not 11.
Jahmyr Gibbs, who's been red hot, scorched earth of late, isn't even inside the top 10.
He's been unbelievable.
But maybe the most notable name is Jonathan Taylor not being inside the top 10. Because how good has this guy been when he's played so far this season? He keeps finding the end zone. He keeps posting 100-plus yards from scrimmage per game. Little bit concerned, though, about 2 things here. 1, the matchup, and 2, what's the peak upside been so far this year for Jonathan Taylor?
His ceiling? I mean, he's been over 100 yards, in 3 straight games?
But it's probably 3 things.
It's
matchup, the passing game work, and he only has 1 top 10 finish this year. So the peak upside, right? That's been a little bit lower compared to where you might expect it to be for Jonathan Taylor. Still a very, very solid running back, but when you're trying to nitpick between RB8 and RB12, that's how you land with RB12 for Jonathan Taylor, who, by the way, has 7 catches in 5 games.
Yeah, and the position's just strong and healthy right now. Yep. So normally what he's done, 100-plus yards in 4 straight, you'd be like, all right, well, he's probably going to be 4th or 5th in our rankings, but the position is just so strong right now. The Vikings matchup is interesting because only 3 running backs have reached 12 points against them this season. However, the last 2 weeks, we had Kyron Williams, and it was the other one.
Jahmyr Gibbs.
Oh, Jahmyr Gibbs, right. I had the wrong name on here. Yeah, 2 of them were over the last 3 weeks or the last 2 weeks. Yep. So, are they trending down, or are they still really good defense that's going to fix itself? That's a tricky one.
Jonathan Taylor's last 4 games, 15.5 fantasy points. What do you think? What's the benchmark? Like, if you have a starting running back and he was your RB1.
I think 15 and above, I feel really good about.
I agree with you. All right, so his last 4 games, 15.5, 26.5, 19.8, 18.7. So he's not hitting like a huge 20-plus point upside.
Take that all year long.
Really good. Do you think that the switch from Anthony Richardson to Joe Flacco is going to impact him in a major way? Because I could see potentially this offense gets, like, the offense is just better with Joe Flacco, right? There's more scoring opportunities because they can potentially get down there. Like, it feels like there's more upside.
Well. Feels like the chances for goal-to-goal opportunities are higher with Richardson than they are with Flacco than Anthony Richardson. And as we know, if they do have the football from the 5-yard line and in, and they're running the ball, it's not going to be Joe Flacco. Yeah. Joe probably could do it, though.
Yeah, a lot of their touchdowns have been passes with Flacco so far. I'm learning.
Yeah, you are.
But maybe some of them rushing attempts for Richardson turn into perhaps dump offs for Taylor too, which could help a little bit. We'd like a little more juice in the passing game for Taylor.
7 catches in 5 games to read.
It's like a Derrick Henry type of a stat, or a David Montgomery kind of a stat.
When I adjusted the offensive scheme and put Flacco in there for Richardson, I almost called him Rochardson. So it's going the wrong direction here.
Cork Cousins coming up next.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't actually affect Taylor much. There were everything kind of offset. He ended up about the same spot, but obviously the receivers skyrocketed. They went from like 48 to 26 with Richardson not in there. So your brain is just incredible. Like when I adjust for the scheme, it goes up by like 1.2 standard deviations. Well, they're going to throw. They're going to throw more. They're going to score more touchdowns through the air. Those kind of things matter. So that affects everyone.
It does affect everybody. All right. Let's look at the quarterback position. Can't wait to see where we're at here in the top 10 because I feel like there's a handful of guys that we could talk about. We're going to throw up the quarterbacks here in just one moment, but when you look at the top 10 of our quarterback spot, I'm pulling it up here on my
It's going to be Kirk Cousins here. We're going
to dive into him here in a second.
There
All
he
right,
is.
we got Jaden Daniels at QB1, Jalen Hurts, then Lamar Jackson. I think that's going to probably be two of the top three every single week. Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray round out the top 5, 6 through 10. You got Kirk Cousins, Joe Burrow, Bo Nix, Geno Smith, and Sam Darnold.
This is fun.
So there's a couple of guys there, especially in that 6 through 10 range that we could have some conversations about. I want to start with Kirk Cousins, though.
Cork.
I want to quote Eminem for the second time this week. Will the real Kirk Cousins please stand up? Because I don't know which Kirk Cousins is the real Kirk Cousins. He has had some unbelievable games, mostly against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yes.
And then he has played other teams that are not the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he has looked like a very average quarterback. Yeah. So, Mike, when you're looking at these projections, how are you projecting Kirk Cousins not going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but instead the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, just to give you some splits on this, because it's ridiculous.
It is.
Yeah, in 2 games against the Bucs, he has 63 fantasy points and 8 touchdowns.
Quarterback one.
Other 6 games combined. Okay, so that was 2 games, 63 points, 8 touchdowns. Other 6 games, 62 points and 6 touchdowns.
It's disgusting. Wow.
That's
Take that
unreal.
Back. Take that back.
That is unreal. So,
then how do you have him as a top?
well, I'll get to that. So he does give you a okay floor because he throws for a lot of yards. He has at least 225 passing yards in 7 consecutive games, so that's good.
Third in passing attempts. Third in pass completions. Fifth in pass attempts.
Right. You love the pass volume. And what's key about the Bucs matchup is that it's a great matchup. Now I know he had a letdown against the Panthers a couple weeks ago, which was a great matchup. But the Bucs have been a great matchup. He's delivered, and this is a good matchup against Dallas. NFL high, 8.2 yards per pass attempt, the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And this is more of a recent issue, too. Their last 2 quarterbacks they have faced, Brock Purdy and Jared Goff, both cleared 25 fantasy points. So it's really that simple. You're getting the pass production, and it's a good matchup. Cousins, I think, is essentially a lineup lock QB1 here.
And you used this stat last week, Mike. But in that game against Carolina, the Panthers scored 35 points when Cousins was on the field. It's just one of those weird weeks where it all went to the running backs.
The Falcons.
I'm sorry. The Falcons scored 35 points. The game became non-competitive. He gets pulled. Like, I don't think this game with Dallas becomes completely non-competitive. But if it does, hopefully it means that if the the Falcons put up 35 points, it means because Kirk Cousins got you 3 passing touchdowns.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Bijan had all them touchdowns. Algier scored 1 in that game. That was like Algier's only good game this year was against Carolina. So that's a good point. Game script got away from him.
I'm going to need to board bet you guys on this one.
Good. Let's do it.
Okay.
'Cause I've got Kirk Cousins at quarterback 11.
This is great.
I disagree with a couple of the things, only because when you talk about the Dallas Cowboys taking on Dallas, 4 quarterbacks have been able to hit 20 fantasy points. You mentioned that, right?
Through the last 2 weeks, yep.
Most of that has been because of rushing quarterback play. Taking on Dallas, you had Brock Purdy, who had 11.6 fantasy points via the rush. You had Lamar, who had 14.7 points just with his legs. You had Derek Carr, who also got there, had 6.1 fantasy points because of his legs. The only quarterback that has thrown 300 yards or more than 2 touchdowns against the Dallas Cowboys is Jared Goff. There's only been one, and he is the best quarterback in the league. There's only been one quarterback that has done it while not utilizing his legs. The one thing that we do know about Kirk Cousins, he cannot use his legs. So you're hoping for that passing game volume like you guys are talking about. I think that stat of 20 or more fantasy points has been more geared towards guys that have been able to utilize their legs against the Dallas Cowboys. I see this as a spot where I would not have him as a set-it-and-forget-it starter here in Week 9. He's still quarterback 11, totally fine to be able to start him. But I want to board bet you guys here.
Okay. Great.
I'm going to say that Kirk Cousins will not be, you say, is top 9 a good split? You guys have him at 5?
Yeah, that's
I have him at 6. All right, I've got him at 11. Let's just say quarterback 9. I'll give you guys one.
That's fine, yeah.
I say Kirk Cousins will not be a top 9 quarterback in Week 9.
I say Kirk Cousins will be a top 9 scorer in Week 9.
Put it on the board.
Put it on the board.
Let's go, Kirky. Get it done.
If he does get there, he's going to have to do it with his arm, which, by the way, you do mention. Like, he throws the ball a ton. He does have a lot of passing yardage. It's just the lack of passing touchdowns against non-Tampa Bay opponents is the part that scares me a little
Didn't
bit.
he just have a comment where he said he wants to run more? He wants to start running a little more?
Oh, I'd love
Didn't he
to
just
see
say that?
I'd
I
love to
swear
see
he
that.
just said that. If it wasn't him, it was someone, another one of them pocket quarterbacks, but I'm pretty sure it was him. And he used to do that pretty well in Washington. Remember, I think he had like a 4 rushing touchdown season. He used to add a little, especially at the goal line with his legs.
I've got a league. It's a 6-point passing touchdown keeper salary cap league, and I've got 3 quarterbacks. And I swear I never pick right on them. Her cousin's Jared Goff, and I have Drake May, who's a $1 keeper who he could become my forever
trying to play
quarterback
matchup.
soon.
Yeah, we should have board betted him last week too.
Yeah.
He had a dud as well.
Drake May?
Yeah.
Because he got hurt after the first quarter. We had 11 points.
Oh yeah, you're right. He did get hurt.
Jeez.
I forgot about that. All right, scratch that. Cut
Yeah.
that. This isn't live. Just
No big deal.
you're right.
he was
I totally spaced on that. You're
Nasty
exactly
last
right.
week, too. Anyways.
Yeah, I'm mixing weeks up here.
I want to say one last thing about quarterbacks inside the top 10. Bo Nix has looked really good the last couple.
Talk about him more over
good
the next
matchup. Yeah,
couple
we'll
of
get-
days for sure.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep, we'll
Another
dive
good
into
streamer
that.
this week.
All right, let's talk about quarterbacks 11 through 20 here really quickly in case you're in a deeper league or a 2 QB league. Starting at 11, Patrick Mahomes. Wow, moving up the rankings a little bit. Baker Mayfield at 12,
Great
Jordan
matchup.
Love, Dak Prescott, and Caleb Williams round out the top 15. Derek Carr, Justin Herbert, Tua, Matthew Stafford, and my guy Jared Goff, 16 through 20 there. Baker Mayfield. Guys, Baker Mayfield continues to crush. 325 or more passing yards in 4 of his last 5 games, multiple passing touchdowns in 5 straight games. Obviously didn't have either of his 2 top pass catchers and won't for the majority of the season. Hopefully we can't wait to see when Mike Evans comes back. But he was still a
this week,
top 10 quarterback last week. Mike, why did you project him as quarterback? Well, I'm not sure where you had him projected. Was he QB 12 or later? I think in your projections.
What,
Why
this
were you
week?
a little
Yeah.
lower this week?
Well, I mean, he still isn't a Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but that wasn't a major problem last week. He was still terrific, 330 yards and 3 touchdowns against Atlanta. Now 22-plus points in 5 consecutive games. They're playing the Chiefs. Only 7 passing touchdowns allowed this season, the 6th fewest. The teams have had to throw against him quite a bit, but Mayfield he's getting the job done. He just continues to do it. He's been good, so still a borderline option, but I just think it's going to be tough playing against
Makes
defense
me
in Kansas
so
City.
nervous. In Kansas City,
yeah.
Monday Night Football, obviously. And the Chiefs, they are the quarterback graveyard. They just suck the life out of quarterbacks. On top of that, I think the Chiefs, once again, are going to try to find a way to run like 61 offensive plays themselves because they're going to run the football a crap ton, kill that clock, play good defense, make this a little bit less of a shootout than most Tampa Bay games have been. Makes me a bit nervous. I've got Baker Mayfield on that team along with Dak Prescott, I believe. Maybe it's Bo Nix. And I think I'm leaning towards the non-Baker option in that.
Interesting.
Which I forget who. Let me confirm.
He just continues to play at such a high level. Even,
He does.
Again,
He
even
has been
last
awesome.
week,
He's been unbelievable.
He just got it done again. It's you got to give him the respect, and that's why we still have him as a streamer in a tough matchup. And maybe there'll be some element of trailing and racking up yards because that's what's happened to the Chiefs. They're actually mid-pack against quarterbacks this season in fantasy points allowed because of all the attempts faced and the yardage. But again, they just don't allow passing touchdowns, and Mayfield's made up a lot of ground with that this year. I believe he's still first, right? Still first in passing touchdowns this year.
I take that back. I don't have a good situation. He'll be in the lineup. Yeah.
All right, well, I just want to say this really quickly, and if you guys don't want to board bet this, I like doing a couple of board bets on.
Yeah, me too. I'll board bet the crap out of anything.
Both of you guys have Patrick Mahomes ahead of Baker Mayfield heading into Week
take this
9.
one.
I've got Baker Mayfield
How'd you
ahead
guys do
of
that one?
Patrick Mahomes.
Okay. Yeah.
Field, I say Baker Mayfield has more fantasy points in Week 9 than Patrick Mahomes.
And I say Patrick Mahomes has more fantasy points than Baker Mayfield in Week 9.
Put it on the board.
Put it on the
I'm
board.
totally like forecasting now. Like Mahomes going to have the edge until like 3:22 to go in the fourth quarter.
that's right.
Chiefs up 24-14. And
Garbage time.
Baker goes garbage time touchdown.
That's right.
Octopus as well gets the 2-point conversion.
You know what's weird? I usually forget like all the red zone things we do. Like I'll be like, I can't remember like 8 of the 10 we did, but the one that was on my mind on Sunday was the Panthers getting to more than 13 points, and they had 7.
14.
They immediately at 7. They scored like the first drive, right? And they're like, they'll get to that easily, and they kept getting close, and they could not score. They just kept turning it over and messing, and then they score. I missed it. I saw the final score. I was like, whoa, they scored in garbage time, like at the last second, and got to 14. So that was a win.
Jalen
win for me.
Coker balling out. I should have never not believed.
I know.
Jalen Coker.
Oh, your guy, yeah, Jalen Coker, yeah.
All right. About a few minutes left here on the show. Let's quickly dive into our top tight end conversation here.
This one could be easy though.
I think so. Look at tight ends 1 through 10. We got Travis Kelce, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, David Njoku, and Kate Otten. Hard to disagree with any of those top 5. They've all been crushing it.
Yep.
6 through 10, Evan Ingram, Kyle Pitts, Jake Ferguson, Dalton Kincaid, and Sam Laporta. Man, top 10.
I think there's only one. There's 2 reasons. Like there's a pretty strong case that tight end 1 weekly should not be a conversation. At least when George Kittle is on a bye.
Yeah.
It should be Travis Kelce, based on
he's
what's
up there
happened
now,
over
yeah.
the past month. Over his past 4 games, he has a target share of at least 32.1% in 3 of them. He has 9 targets in 3 of those games. He's coming off of obviously a mammoth game last week. I think the reason why he isn't runaway tight end 1 this week and why you can make a compelling argument for somebody else is because A, he has 1 touchdown this season. B, he's averaging 8.8 yards per catch. Easily his worst of his career.
Yeah. I mean, the other reason is Brock Bowers is crushing it and just has been money in the bank. He actually had like a down game last week and was still terrific.
5 for 58.
Yeah, you're right. We're seeing like a premier tier. It is close, though. I mean, it's Kittle, it's Kelsey, it's Bowers. I mean, McBride and Joker are going to be in that conversation. Right now, for the time being, Kate Otten is maybe not in that number 1 conversation.
He's number 5 for me this week.
Yeah, exactly. He's been crushing it. But for Kelsey specifically, great matchup. The Bucs have struggled against tight ends, 20+ allowed in consecutive games now with Andrews with them a couple touchdowns, and then Kyle Pitts. And Kyle Pitts had a good game against them a couple weeks ago as well. So this is a matchup that can be exploited.
I get so much hate still on Instagram. That we did a post where we was making bold calls, right? And I had Travis Kelce finishing outside the top 7 or 8 at the position. I get so much hate on that Instagram post that was shared by ESPN NFL of like, look at this idiot. How would he think this happens? And you know what? It only took Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster not being able to play at the spot in order for Travis Kelce to be good.
I can't relate to making bad preseason calls, so I'm not sure what that's like.
I think my post like that was Anthony Richardson. I haven't drafted Anthony Richardson at all. Was like the headline or something, and it was taken a little bit out of context. But I mean, no, it wasn't taken out of context. That's exactly
right. That's exactly what
nailed
you
it.
meant.
Perfectly right.
Also, it's
high
tough.
and mighty. This guy is sitting here celebrating a kid getting benched.
You know what? That's mean Mike Clay for you. What are you going to say?
We have a Lamar Jackson versus Anthony Richardson board bet. I'm just saying.
You want to wave the white flag on that one yet?
I'll take the W on that one right now.
I want to ask.
Accept it.
We got to do one more tight end.
I got one more question about a tight end because we got a guy coming back we've been waiting to see return, and this is AI-generated fantasy insights built with IBM Watson X. Talking about a hot commodity at the tight end position, TJ Hockenson. Guys, we do not have him in the top 10 this week, in part because I think we want to see what he's going to be able to do inside this Vikings offense. We want to see him back on the field for a game before we throw him back into that spot, but I would not be shocked if TJ Hockenson became a top 10 tight end moving forward with the state of the tight end position.
I mean, he was on a points per game basis, wasn't he tight end 1 last year?
I think so. He was certainly top 3. Yeah, he's been a couple of years. 3
important factors here in play for TJ Hockenson. 1, Stefania has mentioned this many times, so I don't feel like I'm speaking out of turn. She does not expect this to be like 20% of the snaps the first game, 25 the second game. By the end of the season, he's playing 100% of the snaps. No, this could be pretty quickly close to a 100% or whatever. 85 to 90% of the snaps players. That's good 1.
Yep.
2, Sam Darnold has been very good this year, so you're not overly concerned about the quarterback. 3, there has not been an emergent number 2 wide receiver or tight end in this offense, right?
Correct.
Jordan Addison has now been, now we're having to decipher whether he's asking for a trade on social media or not. He says he is not. Johnny Munt has been quiet. Justin Jefferson has basically been it, and Aaron Jones as well. So there seems to be a real hole in this offense ready for TJ Hockenson to fill.
Yeah, Aaron Jones and Justin Jefferson enjoying career-high target shares. So maybe those come down a little bit to help get 20% of the targets, or it could be 25% of the targets to TJ Hockenson. He's going to take away from some other guys for sure. Some of it will be those secondary receivers like Addison, like Jalen Naylor, guys like that little Brandon Powell. But Hockenson, there's a path for him to be, no doubt, once again, a top 5 scorer. And he's been top 7 4 consecutive seasons. He had 95 catches in 15 games last season before that ACL. So I'm with you. I knocked him a little bit this week thinking maybe he's limited a little bit. Not a lot, a little bit.
I don't think it's 20%. It also may not be 90.
I'm at 13 for him. So probably not starting him this week, but you'll activate him, throw him on your bench, see how it goes, and then he'll be a every week starter after that.
Yeah, a month ago I was saying there might be a chance that Hockenson returns and in short order is tight end 1. I'm less optimistic on that, but I do think there's a chance, he's somewhere between, let's call it 6 and 8 a lot of weeks.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
When you look at this, you mentioned not having a number 2 pass catcher. I just pulled it up here on True Media. Justin Jefferson has 41 receptions. The next highest guy on the Vikings is Jalen Naylor, Jordan Addison, and Johnny Munt. Each of them have 14 receptions on the season. 14.
Is that excluding Aaron Jones?
That is not including, that's wide receivers and tight ends. That's not including the running back
really need
position.
that second option in that wide receiver / tight end.
Justin Jefferson almost has as many receiving yards as every other wide receiver and tight end combined.
This just in, he's good.
He is so good, and they are just screaming for someone to be that number 2 option in the passing game that isn't just Aaron Jones. So obviously TJ Hockenson is going to be a hot commodity for fantasy managers. Hopefully if you held tight on him. He will be able to pay
Or
off.
knows I need him. I'll tell you that.
Yeah,
one.
immediately becomes, he has a good game or two, suddenly a great trade piece at the fantasy trade deadline because you probably have another good tight end because you didn't have to draft Hawkinson as your one. So you might have Trey McBride and Hawkinson or something like that.
Njoku and Cade Otton or someone you've been running the street.
Yeah, you probably have a good one, so you're going to have a trade piece for sure.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for our rankings conversation. When we come back tomorrow, we're going to dive into Thursday Night Football as well as part 1 of our Week 9 preview. We love you guys so much. Today's show is presented by Boost Mobile. Don't forget to love each other. Be kind to yourself. We'll see you guys on Thursday.
Later.